I'm Matt Smaglia. I'm managing partner and founder of Quantum Crossroads Capital. Candidly, I'm not a physicist, and I've been following quantum for about 7 years now, and it's just been such an incredible place to be. And as you heard from Dimitri, this space is very complex. So it's taken me 7 years, and I feel like I'm barely still scratching the surface. But I get to have very smart people like this as friends, and if I have questions, I can go to them. And what I've learned about quantum over the last 7 years is kind of to answer the question from the gentleman earlier is, where is this heading and the timeline and some things like that. And I've seen these signals picking up over the last 7 years, where it went from maybe once a quarter where we would see something meaningful happen in the quantum space to every month to every week. And I would say even a year ago, we started to see things happening every day where there was a meaningful impact in quantum that was making some pretty big headlines. As Dimitri also pointed out, with Jensen Huang earlier this year mentioning the fact that we're still 20, 30 years away, I think that the people on this panel today will argue a lot of that point, and even Jensen himself have recanted that statement, and now he's saying we're sort of here. It's an immediate thing. So with that said, I would love to go down the line and have everyone introduce yourselves and kind of what your expertise is and the company that you work for.
Candidly, I am a physicist. I'm Ron Walsworth. I'm a professor of physics at the University of Maryland and also professor of electrical and computer engineering. I'm director of the Quantum Technology Center there. UMD is where IEQ spun out of. My colleague friend Chris Monroe is one of the founders. I've been involved in advising startups and founding some have gone public in the past. I'm a scientific advisor also for QCC.
Thank you. I'm Mariana Bonanome. I'm head of AI strategy and partnerships for Sandbox AQ, AI and quantum. And how I landed in Sandbox is coming from academia. So I was a professor of mathematics and computer science for 21 years, but my PhD, my doctoral work was in writing quantum algorithms to solve combinatorial group theoretic problems. And so I was doing this quantum research back in the late 90s, early 2000s, back when only the researchers were really talking about it. So for me, this has been really revolutionary, and it spurred me to leave academia and come into industry to help not just set up the pipelines for students and for upskilling current industry engineers and stakeholders, but beyond that, to see what kind of tech we could build. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. Thank you for having me.
My name is Gavin Kennedy. I'm the global head of professional services at D-Wave. So the professional services team at D-Wave works with our clients to help them solve their business problems and their use cases today. So we use a technology called quantum annealing and help our customers who don't have the skills in-house to be able to solve the problems, put together the mathematical formulations, use our solvers and our actual quantum computer that's in production today to get the return on their investment now and be able to solve their hard problems today.
So, hi everyone, my name is Ryan McKinney. I'm the Director of Government Relations and General Counsel of Compliance at Quantinuum. We're a spin-out from Honeywell and the world's largest quantum-only quantum computing company. We've got 550 employees globally, and we make quantum hardware and software. So I'm based in DC and focus on a lot of the policy issues, and I'm excited to talk today about how the national security implications, talking about China, talking about encryption and domestic policy also influence the investing community and how we can invest more both publicly and in the private sector in quantum. So glad to be here today.
I'm going to go right back to you, Ryan. So right now, Congress, since 2017, there was a Quantum Initiative Act that was passed for $1.275 billion for the U.S. This compared to China, you're going to hear China a lot today, was about $15 billion to our 1.275, and this was over a 5-year spend. Right now, it's up for renewal, so we're waiting on Congress to push this through. There were hearings about 3 weeks ago to really talk about it and, again, educate people, understand what is this technology, why is it going to have a big impact. So, Ryan, overall for you, what does the reauthorization mean not just for the quantum companies themselves, because that will be a big recipient of it, but also for people who might be looking to invest, and also just the general public.
Yeah, so in 2018, when President Trump and his first administration signed the National Quantum Initiative Act, it was a watershed moment. The US was light years ahead of everyone else. Now we are 7 years into that, and we're now 20 months into the National Quantum Initiative Act, having failed to have been reauthorized. The act technically went dormant on September 30th of 2023. So as a signaling mechanism, this shows that the US we are not putting our money where our mouth is. Quantum is an amazingly bipartisan issue. A lot of that is driven by the fact that China is clearly outspending us. We will never out-China China, but we can certainly out-innovate China and out-strategically invest China. The problem from a policy standpoint, from my perspective, is that AI and the CHIPS Act have eaten up so much of the energy in the room that quantum gets pushed aside. And also, I think Dimitri did a fantastic job explaining unbelievably difficult concepts in 20 minutes. Quantum's really freaking hard to understand, and it's really hard to make policymakers in an age where budgets are tight. Everything is getting cut from NSF down the line. Everything that's not defense is being cut. Why do we care about quantum? And that is an area where quantum is hard to sell to investors, to the general public, and to policymakers. So getting the National Quantum Initiative Act is the floor, basically, that we need as a country to signal that the US cares about quantum, and to signal to industry that government is a customer and a user of quantum to help the industry get through the valley of death. The next 3 to 5 years are absolutely critical as we continue to prove this out in the labs, bring near-term use cases to market, and commercialize. And the US government and global governments oftentimes at this early stage are the either only or the best customer when we're talking about either purchasing $100 million machines or doing really deep physics use cases for quantum computing. So let me explain a little bit about that. So a lot of the work being done currently is at the national labs. We do a lot of work with Oak Ridge, the NNSA, Los Alamos, Sandia, things like the effects of aging on plutonium to protect the nuclear stockpile. Things that at the moment there's not a huge private sector need for. And so having government funding as a signaling mechanism and as a government as a buyer is really important to us to show out, okay, this is a near-term use case of interest to national security, to economic security, provides near-term funding for us to either get to the point where we either can, go public or merge or do something in this kind of weird limbo period. And it shows that the US government cares about this and is on the cutting edge. What we're seeing, obviously China has invested somewhere around 15 to 20 billion. They've earmarked another 15 to 20 billion over the next 5 years. We're seeing allies as well as adversaries invest in quantum as well. Europe has spent billions, and you're seeing the Middle East and Singapore specifically basically building an ecosystem from nothing, and they're doing it in just a couple of years. And so the US, we had a question about education earlier, we're losing talent and we're losing the opportunity basically to have the best people, the best supply chains, and the best US made quantum chips and quantum R&D. And so from a policy standpoint, reauthorizing this act, which will have 2.7 billion over the next 5 years as compared to the 1.2 from the first National Quantum Initiative is really key. And it's important specifically for the DOE and the DoD to lead on this because that's where the money is, and those are the folks best positioned to get under the hood, identify the use cases most important to the government, and work with industry. So again, we can move from the lab into the commercialization period with the US government as a partner and as a buyer of those technologies.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've been doing at QCC is really working with local and state governments on how to bring education to various fields for quantum. And this is anything from middle school programs to high school programs to even state colleges, things like that, because we feel like if we are going out and investing in the community and building an education, there's going to start to become that workforce. And it's hyper important for national security purposes, but also just in terms of where our stance is in the world of technology, to have a lot of these people. And you don't necessarily, no offense, but you don't have to be a physicist to get into quantum. And I think that there's all walks of life that are going to be part of this ecosystem, and Some of the people that I've met in this field are by far some of the most incredibly creative people I've ever met, because they're thinking way outside the box. I mean, they're talking about things that normally, everyone would look at and say, look, you're crazy, or this is science fiction. And then they go and prove it. And all of the companies here, they've done that, and they have these very audacious goals to go out there. So on the application side, Gavin, part of your role is obviously working with different companies. What are some of the applications that we're seeing, and what's some of the timeline that we're going to see on the hardware side for quantum?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start with, there are actually two different kinds of quantum computing. I want to make sure everybody understands that. There's gate model, and then there is annealing. So everybody else who is in the quantum computing market is building, as well as D-Wave is, a gate model computer. A couple years ago, or many years ago, D-Wave made a decision to also build a quantum annealing computer. And we have the only quantum annealing computer that exists, and we are actively using it with customers, to your point, to actually build applications that can be used today. So we just released a couple weeks ago our second generation, or Advantage 2, of our annealing quantum computer, and it has over 4,400 qubits in it that is out there for consumers to use. So you can use it as a customer to actually access our computer and use it on your own, or my services team can also assist if companies don't have those skill set in-house and help build out those applications. But it is real today. We actually have clients in production who are using our system, and we're using applications that are in production scheduling, resource scheduling, so any kind of production floor, manufacturing floor, helping them schedule all of the assets that they need to build something. Resource scheduling, from helping managing the resources at a company, to resource optimization. We have an application in production right now for a company called NTT Docomo, where we're helping them place their cell phone assets, and also, logistics routing. So any kind of logistics routing use case, we have applications that we build in that space, as well as cargo loading. So those are just a couple examples of use cases that we've worked with our customers. But my team works on a daily basis with actual customers now in building out many different use cases that we have on the path to production. But I want to make sure it's understood that our quantum annealing computer is live today. There is no timeline. It's today, and we actually have customers in production who are getting the value out of the investment that they're making in our technology to actually get their problem solved and be able to get their return on their investment in our technology today.
So Mariana, let's step out for a moment. So we've been talking a lot about quantum hardware, and the first part of the question is, can you explain NISC, right? What's this era that we're in right now? And then also, there's so much hype around AI. It's the shiny object. It's undeniable that everyone has an AI company these days. Even a coffee mug company is probably AI somehow. So where does quantum and AI have an intersection?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so let's talk about NISC. So NISC stands for Noisy Intermediate Scale Quantum Era, and that's the era that we're in right now. And Preskill coined that term in 2018, and we kind of remain there. So as Dimitri was saying, we're on our way to having what's called fault tolerance. So in order to have fault tolerance, you need enough qubits for your processing to be useful, but also you need, as Dimitri pointed out, you need error correction. And so you have these two levers that you can pull to get closer to fault tolerance. As Dimitri pointed out, we're now where if we have 100 qubits, one of them will be logical, meaning you can use it, it's usable, it's fault tolerant. And so if we have to get to a certain threshold in order to implement a quantum algorithm, we have our work cut out for us. Now, happily, a lot of the hardware engineers and companies that we saw posted on the slides earlier, they're hitting their milestones. And this was actually, I have to say, it was shocking to me. I'm a quantum algorithmist. My thesis advisor was a physicist when I did my doctoral work. And I remember asking him in 2007, okay, tell me the truth. What do you think? Are we going to be able to build a quantum computer. Never mind the algorithms, we can write them down no matter what. Give me a piece of paper, we have them, but can we build it? And he said, I'll give it a 50-50 shot. And this is a physicist saying this. So it was, in the air whether we were actually able to pull it off. And so Dimitri really outlined that really nicely, where not any one of the pieces are impossible, but when you put them together and everything has to function simultaneously, flawlessly, that's when we start getting into a huge engineering challenge. So for me to see that we're hitting the milestones was huge for me, huge. I did not anticipate it in my lifetime, but here it is. Now, speaking to the question of the puzzle, the AI and the quantum, how do they fit together? Well, what we're looking at is that not every problem will necessarily be tackled by a quantum computer, a quantum hardware and algorithm together. Many problems are fine to be solved using classical compute methods, traditional methods. They're totally fine, they're fast, it's fine. The infrastructure is there. What we're looking at is for quantum to come in and potentially solve these hugely challenging questions in the area of simulation, high parameter space, looking at mathematical modeling of really complicated scenarios, these kinds of things, where materials discovery, drug discovery, these are where quantum excels in these kinds of problems. The classical will still be there, of course. So what we're looking at is a classical quantum hybridization. So likely compute will be this hybridization of classical and quantum. And now AI, what is the AI? Well, the AI is the most likely candidate for the classical part of the compute. They inform each other. I'll give you one example of how we're doing this at Sandbox right now in real time. So Dimitri mentioned sensing. That data coming out of quantum sensors is very noisy. It's a very complicated signal. So what you need is a layer of AI to denoise that signal and extract what's meaningful. We could not do that earlier. We've had quantum sensors around for 20 years at least, but they haven't been useful until now because AI has become sophisticated enough for us to make sense and useful applications of that signal. So quantum and AI are going to come together, and there's going to be this symbiotic relationship. One more thing I want to have on your radar, I'm sure you've been listening to the news, and everybody has on their lips agents, agentic AI. So that's the big thing right now, where AI agents will be acting autonomously on our behalf. And what does that look like? What we're looking at moving forward, I think, is that agents will be able to help us decide whether a part of our workflow process should be quantum, or it should be classical, or it should be whatever it might be. And so I think that even if you're not a quantum expert, I think that very quickly, rapidly, we're going to have the chance to catch up because our workflows will be kind of dynamically orchestrated. And again, we can talk about those words more later.
Yeah, I know one of the Mag 7 personally that is working on this, where their cloud has access to a few quantum systems right now. So on your laptop, you can log in and have access to a quantum system, and they're getting to the point where the AI that you can code in will then decipher what system to use, because not every system can do all things, right? Some are better than others, and at specific problems. And what I think is so cool about it is they candidly said, look, we'll probably have the AI go out there, figure out what quantum system to use for that couple seconds, get information back, and then couple that with high performance computers. And so now you have this entanglement of all three, where you're working on incredibly complex problems where a quantum system is basically giving you a shortcut map or a Cliff Note version of something, and helping the classical system just get there that much faster instead of having to figure out the whole route itself. So that's what's really been exciting to kind of see just in the last year as all of this evolves. So Ron, we've been talking about networking, AI, hardware on the sensor side. This is something that we're seeing happening now, if not, it has been happening for years. So this is not an area where, from an investment perspective, we have to wait very long to see revenues. explain to us sort of what is quantum sensing?
Yeah, thanks, man. So quantum sensing is using quantum effects in atoms and in other materials to measure things. AI needs data. Well, quantum sensors can provide unique and special kinds of data. And it can be useful for a wide range of sectors. Dimitri outlined many of them. So I'd say that quantum sensing, we've had quantum sensors of a late 20th century old school type for a long time. The atomic clocks that are on board the GPS satellites that are synchronizing just about everything in the world except when they're not, right, are much to ill effect at times, are a form of quantum sensors. They're sensing how space-time evolves and then allowing us to synchronize. MRI is a kind of 20th century version of quantum sensing, looking at the phenomena inside the nuclei, inside the molecules in your body. But that old school sensing, though great, was just getting you collective information about some group of things that you were interested in. The modern quantum sensors are able to go down to the atomic scale and to measure things remarkably sensitively, taking advantage of full capabilities that we have, including entanglement, superposition, coherence, et cetera. So the things that are possible in the sectors Dimitri outlined and many more, in electronics, in extreme environments, all sorts of places, are really dramatic. And if I'm a quantum sensing guy, so obviously I like it, although I love all the other sectors too. I would double down on Dimitri's point, which is that if we're underinvesting in quantum overall versus something like AI, if that's true, then the sector that's really underinvested in is the sensing and imaging part. And because it's getting, single-digit million-dollar investments, even though the outcomes are relatively quick, in 2 to 3 years, products can be developed. They may not be $100 billion markets, but there's often billion-dollar scale markets for a lot of these things. So I think there's an underappreciation of that. Do you agree, Dimitri? Yes, it does. He's nodding. Yeah, that sort of thing. And for nearer term, you, sir, had a question earlier to Dimitri about the risks in the earlier panel. I think quantum technologies, almost all of them are going to, at some point, do what people we're talking about. Some are doing it today, as we know. It's going to be, the real risks are, it's like the triangle. How big is the return and how long? Not that there's going to be a return. It's going to be a positive return. And in the sensing one, the timescales are shorter. And though the total return, the size of the markets may not be quite as large, your uncertainty on that is much smaller. So it's a fairly high certain, let's be honest, moderate scale markets, 100 million, billion scale markets with few year timescales. So I think there's and also what Dimitri said too, the sensing, the networking, the computing, both annealing, simulation, fault tolerant, et cetera, gate-based, and all the supporting materials and picks and shovels stuff, they feed into each other and they're beautifully staged, right? And we're seeing exits now, right? We're seeing some of the companies for some of these things having profit. So I think it's, don't worry about China, as long as we do our job. Almost all of the top, just not all, but more than half of the top advances in fundamental quantum science and technology of the last 30 years were in America. Most of the companies, not all, but most that are doing big things are in America. Your guys' companies and other ones too, your company and many others. But you, guys like Nat and Dimitri and all of you are playing a key role. Our real strength in America is our innovation, our creativity, and we're not all marching in lockstep. And we have this, this capitalist system, when it works well, it works really well. So now's the time to get in and help it make. So you guys have a role to play too.
So one of the things that I love about this field is, we've been talking about timelines, and I've talked to lots of investors in quantum who've done this for many years, and candidly, they all have been pointing to now being the moment. So the joke in quantum is always it's 5 years away. So now really, I think we've seen a really big inflection point just this year. It is the International Year of Quantum and Science. But I think that overall, we're seeing a lot of activity just within companies, and as you mentioned, there have been lots of exits from companies, so we're seeing that as well. Dimitri mentioned, Q-Day, and this is sort of our Y2K moment that we're approaching. And Ryan, I'm going to come back to you for a second here to talk a little bit about PQC, but also data harvesting and how that's happening now, and it's good to protect for that.
Yeah, so I was a M&A attorney and cybersecurity attorney before going into quantum. And so the Q-Day is what first drew me into quantum because of the cybersecurity effects. And so I want to take just a step back because I think this is a nuanced issue, but it's the issue that is most often brought up about quantum in the popular press. If you've seen a Wall Street Journal article, it's probably either been about the investment in quantum or it's been about China's going to, beat us in the race, use Shor's algorithm, hack all of our data. It's really scary. Obviously, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But as someone who is, in the industry, is pushing for more private sector and public sector funding of quantum, I think it's important to acknowledge the risk, talk about the mitigation steps that are already there, and then say why it's important to fund quantum for good. And so the risk is that a quantum computer, Dimitri's already talked about this, is that RSA and the encryption that basically our entire digital world is built on is a type of encryption that is almost impossible for a classical computer to run, but very easy for a powerful fault-tolerant quantum computer to run. And when you run what's called Shor's algorithm, you could break RSA encryption and potentially, wreak havoc, whether it's changing digital signatures, if you got access to a financial institution, if you got access to the intellectual property of a pharmaceutical company. Like, it is cybersecurity risk that we know today on steroids when we think about the potential risk of a quantum computer running that type of attack. Obviously, the fact that China has invested 20 billion, quantum is very much part of the civil military fusion in the Chinese Communist Party. It's a scary thing. Unfortunately, that leads a lot of people to question quantum generally and say it's a scary issue, it's a national security issue. Should we really be funding a machine that could lead to our, national downfall? That's, hyperbole, but I think it does make people question quantum. And so the take on that is that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, since 2016 has been on this issue. We are not behind the ball at all. NIST has been on this now for almost a decade. And in August of 2024, they standardized their first set of PQC, post-quantum cryptography algorithms. Those are now out. Any organization, government or private sector can start playing with those algorithms and instituting them into their cryptographic stack. So a solution is there. Getting government agencies and the private sector to actually follow and implement is going to be a long and arduous process. You can't just flick a switch and all of a sudden all of your encryption is quantum safe PQC. It can take up to a decade basically to replace encryption systems. And we've got to do a better job of just messaging that both from the government and the private sector that there is a threat. There is a mitigation that exists, and it's called these PQC algorithms. We've got to start the process today that requires cryptographic inventory, saying, what does my encryption stack look like? What is my most high-value data? Is it at risk of a quantum attack? And then how do I, in an efficient manner that doesn't lead to latency or problems throughout my business, institute that to protect the data? And that can be, again, a very long process. So from a legal standpoint, if I'm advising a client with a lot of high value data, I'm going to say, you've got to start the process today. Make sure that this is a risk that the board knows about. Make sure that your senior legal folks, compliance, and IT are all starting to build out this plan such that, again, there will be a point at which it becomes negligent to not have started this process towards being PQC compliant. There will be a time when reasonable cybersecurity under any contract, government contract or otherwise, is going to basically require via an audit that you have again started the process to implement PQC. So there is a mitigation, but you need to start the process today. And NIST is really trying basically to sound this alarm and push this out throughout the government and private sector. The other thing I'll say is that quantum itself is a sword to cybersecurity. It will at some point break RSA and classical encryption. It's also a shield. There are quantum leverage solutions to help protect data. Dimitri mentioned QKD, quantum key distribution. There's also what's called quantum random number generators, which can provide perfectly random numbers at the bottom of an encryption stack, which can further protect data and be used on top of PQC. So I see the cybersecurity of the future as being the NIST PQC algorithms plus these quantum leveraged solutions. And to the point about data harvesting, the threat is live today. We are still a ways off from having a fault-tolerant quantum computer that could break encryption. That, Dimitri, I think gave 8 years. I think 8 to 10 is pretty much within the realm of possibility. The US government has set 2035 as the goal to be PQC compliant. I think we can safely agree somewhere in that time span seems right. However, any data that has been stolen over the last 20 years in any type of attack, even if that data was perfectly encrypted, the company did everything right, but there was a breach, whether it was by just your run-of-the-mill cyber criminal, by an adversarial nation state, what have you. That data today is meaningless ones and zeros. But at the point in time, a quantum computer that is fault tolerant exists, that data can then be decrypted. So you could have been hacked in 2008 and you could have had, again, very valuable IP, personal information, financial data that was hacked. You either disclosed it or felt that you didn't have to disclose it under privacy or cybersecurity law because it was encrypted and it was meaningless and they could not basically de-anonymize it and make it personal information. That becomes a risk 20 years later, potentially if a quantum computer is able to hack that. We call that hack now, decrypt later. So that threat is live. That cat is out of the box, the horse is out of the barn, whatever analogy you want to use. And so a ton of legal risk when we think about cyber insurance, how basically to deal with the damages that come 20 years later when a company basically at that point in time did nothing wrong. Fascinating legal and cybersecurity questions. But what you can start doing today is start instituting those PQC algorithms.
Quick question. As a business owner, how much, like we have a law, how much does it cost to, we have 110 employees, we just updated our system, how much would you say it costs to be compliant?
Repeat the question. Yeah.
Sure, the question was basically how much would it cost to be compliant, to become quantum safe? Let me start by, because I have a better answer to this, let me start by defining the risk, which is that the average data breach in the US today is $9.44 million. And that's everything from lost reputation, paying your legal fees, paying regulators, whatever you have to do, 9.44 million. A quantum hack could potentially be limitless. Like we're talking based from a cyber insurance standpoint, folks at Travelers and a lot of the folks that offer cyber insurance are trying to figure this out because it's at the scale basically of a terrorist attack where the insurance companies are going to need the government to backstop them because the potential risk is limitless. So that's the question of the risk. The question of the compliance piece, I'd actually like to get Sandbox AQ in on this because I know y'all do a lot of the PQC compliance program. It's not going to be cheap, but it's also compared to the level of risk. It's something you're going to have to do from a legal liability standpoint, and it makes sense. It's going to be a lot cheaper to do now rather than in 4 or 5 years when the cost of cyber insurance goes through the roof.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So right now, we have a security suite, and we've been able to build this out with these first mover partners, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, BNP Paribas, and others. And so we have an inventory and remediation security suite. And so it works well for large financial services institutions because someone like a JPMC, they've acquired so many institutions over the years where at this point they're so enormous. They have tens of thousands of applications and their cryptography protocols. Many times no one has line of sight into where the cryptography even lives in their systems and if they're outdated. So when we work with institutions, sometimes we find surprise, this protocol was broken in the 90s even. It all depends on who you are, right? So we do this inventory and then we highlight where there's potential for remediation. So now how we handle it is we want you to remain compliant. So we add a layer of quantum safe security where applicable, and depending on the use case, whether it be a key distribution or whatever it might be, there are key exchange protocols that are in the NIST standards. It depends on the application, but we layer in the NIST standardized protocols on top of the already compliant protocols. And you have a dashboard and you have line of sight into all your cryptography. That's what it looks like for us today. Monetarily, I couldn't tell you, I'm not on that team, but we're running demos right now. We also have our GSIs, so Accenture, EY, and Deloitte are also working on our behalf with partners to employ our solutions. So you could either come directly to us or one of our GSIs. But we're not the only game in town, there are others, so you should definitely do your homework and see what that entails.
Devin, did you have anything to add on encryption or?
Nope.
So I'm going to go ahead and open this up to questions, but anything else that you guys all want to add as we get into Q&A?
I promised Dimitri we talk about it, because on the car ride up, Dimitri was asking me about, our sensing vertical has not just magnetocardiography, so we have the navigation, which is so exciting. And Dimitri was like, it works? And I was like, actually, yes, it really works. So we have, our customers are Airbus, Boeing, the US Air Force, and the Royal Air Force. And we have our devices, which are reuse and recenters. They're one of the most sophisticated quantum sensor, very sensitive.
I'm one of the inventors, so she's the.
I'm looking this way because I'm like, you know all about it. They're incredible, but they pick up such a noisy signal that we need that AI. So that's our proprietary AI layer on top of it to denoise that signal. And it turns out that the Earth's magnetic crust, the crustal surface of the Earth, has a very distinct magnetic field map, which is like a fingerprint at any given location. And so having the maps of the crustal surface of the Earth for magnetic fields, and then having a local magnetic field map for an air or potentially a ground or potentially a submarine or subterranean vehicle, you can do this with the AI at point location, and it's not jammable, it's not spoofable. So all those attacks that Dimitri mentioned that are happening right now, we're building up the secondary system as a layer of defense against it. But again, we're talking about investment. What can we invest in right now that will have returns? Sensing is one of the things in the shorter term, and that's one of the exciting applications.
And the post-quantum cryptography.
And the PQC.
Yeah,
The
and working with
PQC.
folks like D-Wave who have systems which are operating now and some of the other companies.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'd say that you mentioned there's subterranean, there's in addition to just GPS denied navigation in the air or whatnot, there's on the surface of the Earth, in cluttered environments, inside of buildings and things like this, and structures where you don't get a good GPS signal, underneath the Earth, for mining and exploration, deep underwater, and space.
And space.
A lot of
Well,
the
AI and space are very,
And sensing,
space and
Yeah.
quantum are very tied together.
a lot of the ways that things are going to navigate as we spacecraft and rovers and whatnot, as we expand out into the solar system, increasingly will involve electromagnetic fields that you're mapping and monitoring. And right now, the sensors, the existing sensors they have aren't good enough for a variety of reasons. These quantum sensors look like they're going to be. One of the companies that I'm founding called ARC is in QCC may be involved with is developing these sort of quantum sensors that could be good for space and other kinds of applications.
So on that, I do want to ask, I want to come back to sensing just really quick, but I can't claim this as my own, and a few people in this room have heard me say this before, but we could invest billions today in quantum or spend trillions later on defense, which is a crazy statistic when you start thinking about it. So the country that wins quantum supremacy basically wins the world. There's no catching up. So we're constantly at this point.
I'm confused. So you got 2.5 billion that the U.S. spends, and you got China spending 15 to 20. Now I'm an absolute guy. I'm not a relative guy. Okay, so they spend 10 times as much. How much do we need to spend to make to?
So it's
as
a
profile?
tough question because I feel like the ecosystem that we have in the U.S., I feel like we could underspend and overdeliver. I wholeheartedly think that we have the wherewithal in the startup ecosystem and the mentality of thinking very outside the box. We're not, ironically, binary when it comes to thinking in this sector, right? So we're very much so big thinkers and we're entrepreneurialists, right? I think that when we're looking at China, for instance, they're sort of like, we're just going to keep hammering the same nail over and over.
Forgive me, I'm a Lower Merion PhD in finance guy. I'm your nightmare over there. So I want to ask you a very simple question, and I got it 50 years ago. I mean, I would have been a slippery rock if I had the conversation today.
Yeah.
But the question I have for you is, give me a number you need. What is going to prophylactically, in terms of investment, from a disintermediation standpoint and from a government support, what is the number? I mean, you guys are studying this stuff. I'm not. What is it?
Around 10 billion.
Okay.
I think you have to break.
Yeah, I think that it's in a bunch of different areas, but I agree. I think that around the 10 billion range, but also you have firms like us, QCC, that's privately investing in this. this. So we're looking to deploy a significant amount in the US to help advance a lot of early stage companies, so pre-seed, seed, and A. And that's really where there's a lack of investment in the overall quantum ecosystem because
But in fairness, government has created the seed in major medical advances that a lot of pharmaceutical companies have taken advantage of. If it wasn't for the government, we wouldn't have an iPhone.
100%.
90% of the
Yeah.
government supported this.
Can I ask?
So the question is, we understand the add-on investments that this talented panel is going to make. And, you know,
Sure.
so the question is, how much does government need to do to seed it in order for this to be more explosive?
I think it's not just the amount, it's being consistent with the constant distribution. So when you're having a pullback or a ratchet back in different areas of technology or science, where people aren't really sure of, where they're going next or where, if their program's gonna get funded, that has a ripple effect across the industry. So I think to Ron's point, yeah, we're probably looking in the $10 billion range. I think that's a certain conservative figure, but we're also learning a lot. And I think that what we've seen just in the last couple of years is the fact that, 3 weeks ago, Google came out with a report saying we don't need, 20 billion or 20 million qubits anymore to do a certain algorithm. We can now do it in 1 million. And that means that we're just getting more efficient with the way that we're able to process data. And I think that we're going to continue to see more efficiency driving that number of logical qubits down. And we're going to see a lot more advances on the qubits themselves. So there's this convergence that's going to happen a lot sooner than we all kind of realize that it's going to happen. And that's the scary point. Like we kind of jokingly talk about the ChatGPT moment. That kind of made AI aware in all sectors. And it really had a profound impact, even in Congress, where we had these congressional leaders that all of a sudden said, wait a second, what is this AI that people are talking about? And it caught people almost by surprise. We have a responsibility right now to start having as many of these dialogues as possible to non-quantum people, to educate as much as we possibly can. That's why we're candidly here today. And to start these dialogues and debates and policy discussions so that they don't happen when we actually hit the milestone. What I would hate to see is a company come out with a cure for cancer in 5 years, 10 years from now, and then we start the debate on, well, is this something that we should rely on? Let's start that debate today. Let's spend 5, 10 years debating it. Cool. That's fine because we're not there quite yet, but we shouldn't have these discussions when it actually happens.
Did you guys see this being done through the same agencies that come up with all these new technologies that are 10 years out, like through DARPA, ARPA, like the bill that was passed that you mentioned? Was it done through that symbiotic relationship with the agencies?
Often.
But
Inconsistent.
universities,
Yeah.
laboratories, private industry?
Yes.
Because that track record works well.
Yes, so DARPA has a program called QBI, Quantum Benchmarking Initiative, over the next 8 years that basically is going to crown a specific type of technology that is fault tolerant over the long term. So we love and appreciate that program, want it to continue to be funded. I think to the point earlier about just the absolute level, we've seen significant funding from government. Oftentimes it's just been peanut buttered over about 10 different agencies when maybe 2 or 3 would have been a little bit more efficient to drive specific use cases. But to drive home Gavin's point, we all have customers today. People are building algorithms. They're trying to build a workforce to, if they are not able to get, a commercially relevant result today, they know that by building algorithms today, they're going to be able to get that in 2 or 3 years, if not sooner. We need the government to take a similar strategic approach. And I think personally the DOE and DOD are best positioned to do that rather than just peanut buttering that across every government agency.
And I'll add to that in the compute part of this, as I said earlier, there are 2 different kinds of quantum computing. There's annealing and gate. And when it comes to the funding, the peanut butter spread, most goes to the gate model because that's what people think is the only type of quantum computing. But in order to get your return on your investment today, there is this thing called quantum annealing. And we have a computer that is actually working in production for our customers today. So as far as that investment goes, don't just invest in the gate model, invest in the annealing side of it as well, because you will actually get the see your return today, and we'll actually be able to today start to see how we can better utilize this and better get some results from the technology that is in production today.
One of the things that I'll add to from an investment perspective, and this is again kind of where I sit and what our thesis really follows right now, is companies that are building on top of the existing hardware that's out there. And I want to really highlight that, because if you're an application developer today, you're going to go out and simulate it. It's faster to do this on a NVIDIA cluster of thousands of GPUs than it might be on some quantum systems. Not necessarily D-Wave in some cases, because they are a lot more advanced than others. But I think that that transition will shift over in a couple of years from now, when you're going to start to see quantum computers far outpace what you can do on classical systems. So anyone who's making investment right now, going into companies that are building applications, I love talking to founders who are actually building their application today for a quantum world, as opposed to a company that's building it in a classical way, knowing that they're going to have tech debt, and in 5 years from now, they're going to have to strip out their entire code base and start from scratch again. So we are already starting to see that. Again, from an investment horizon, it's the picks and shovels. It's focusing on the companies that will end up supporting the broader ecosystem for quantum. It's not just focusing on one thing. We're looking at companies that are even doing dilution refrigerators. How do you kind of cool these down to negative 470 degrees Fahrenheit for some of these quantum chips that exist out there, right? So there's a lot of companies that we can invest in right now, but also have really great broader applications in other sectors. So with that said, I would love to open it up to more Q&A, unless you guys have anything else to add. Yeah, sir.
I'm not really sure I'm following this, but it seems to me that there's an argument or consensus belief that the existing private market through venture capital and other mechanisms is insufficient to fund that.
So
Every time I talk to anybody at Sand Hill Road, it feels like they're tripping over their own money. They have no place to put it. So I'm curious, like, why are they not interested in investing in this? What is it that's unattractive about quantum computing?
Well, they don't like to actually take risk.
So the question for the audience online,
Their
if you
customers,
haven't
60%
heard,
of the deal's failing,
is why hasn't traditional VC been investing in quantum, and why can't they? So I think that it starts out with the shiny object, which is AI. Everyone's been almost wholly focused on AI, so that's the first thing. The second is there's not a lack of deal flow out there. I mean, we've looked at hundreds of companies just in the last 6 to 9 months that are investable companies. There are 4 that we're looking to deploy capital to within the next month. And I would say that when it comes to a investor, this is really complicated stuff. So this isn't just I can hire an intern out of college to go start reviewing quantum companies, which is what traditional VCs do. And candidly, I think that's part of the allure for me to become a VC, was the fact that I had pitched to venture at my old company, and it was almost impossible to explain to them what I was doing, and it wasn't even super deep tech. And that's because they either have somebody that's not an expert in a specific field, so they have a broader lack of knowledge. And then the other aspect to it is the fact that they like to kind of spray and pray. They want to get 1 or 2 really big unicorns in their portfolio, and they're cool with the fact that 90% of the rest have gone away. We take a very different approach on our investment level. We get in with the founders. We work with them from the very beginning, the ideation phase. We want to get our hands dirty, because if we're deploying capital at $1 million minimum check size, we really need to know how that team works together, how creative they are, what their product is, what their moat is, but also because we have somebody like Dimitri on our team who understands the science of it. That's another area that a lot of traditional VCs just don't have access to. And then we have another part of the leg of the team that has deep institutional knowledge and portfolio construction and management there. So, we have a very unique approach to how we're doing this specifically, because I think that we also have a responsibility. We can't go out there and just spray money around quantum. Because anyone who's doing anything in quantum right now is probably really smart, because you can't budget. You can't just go out there and say, I just read about it yesterday and now I'm doing a quantum company. But also on the other side, it's really paying attention to sort of where this trajectory is going. And again, I talked about it before, the inflection point where the hardware, the networking, the sensors, all of these things start to really become more mainstream within an audience.
Maybe
I think if I could just add one more
You need
thing
this,
to that
you need
question.
this, you need this.
Me too.
If I could just add one more perspective on this, I think what's really interesting is we were in the space of hardware kind of in the 80s and 90s. Then the US has been in the software phase for a long time, right out of Silicon Valley. Now we're moving back into hardware. And in some sense, that muscle memory has to come back. It's a different, you can't start a company with 2 or 3 people and make margins of 90% in hardware. It's a different, and when we're coming back to it.
We did that as a country in the past, right? You look at Gordon Moore and all the others that built Silicon Valley, Fairchild and Intel, et cetera. There was decades of huge investments to make the first germanium, then silicon good enough. And then people laughed at the early little proto-integrated circuits while they were using vacuum tubes and things like this. But as you get into the 70s, kind of like your curves, Dimitri, it takes off. And the people who made a lot of the big money in those early days were the ones who got in first. And then by the late 70s, and into the 80s, you got Microsoft and Apple and these things which are building on the hardware. They're not building that underlying hardware, they're making amazing companies building on that, right? So it's, you look at what Matt and Dimitri are doing, you're thinking about this full stack, right?
Yeah.
Both the hardware all the way through the application space.
And I think it's hard to also put a number, we talked about this a few times, but it's hard to put a number on some of these companies because a quantum system actually owns part of the algorithm. So if you're a company that invests in curing cancer, right? So you're an application company or an AI, and you find the cure for cancer and you're built on top of a Quantinuum. Well, how do you put a number to what Quantinuum's value is going to be at this point? Because they're now part of that solution. And I think that we're going to see numbers just in funny money territory where it's going to scale massively in a very, very short order. Yes.
I was curious about the energy impacts of this. So we've seen that with AI, right? That AI has boomed, technology is advancing exponentially, investment is advancing. Now there's critics, right? There's lawsuits over pollution and energy usage. There's lawsuits from content creators now that have had their, I know this is not the same industry, but like, who are your critics? Who is opposed to this? And what are the risks there?
So we actually published.
Repeat the question.
So what is the impact on energy is kind of the question from quantum computing.
Yeah, and then more broadly, like, who are the stakeholders that might be opposed to this kind of advancement if there are?
So I'll answer the energy part. I'm not sure I can answer the critics part, but from an energy perspective, we did publish in Nature a couple months ago our quantum supremacy paper. So we do feel that we were the first person who have solved a problem where we actually showed quantum supremacy. And as part of that explanation, it showed the low energy that we would use in order to do that. So we do agree that, somebody said it earlier, that classical will never go away, right? There's always going to be problems that a classical computer can solve good enough, so why not just do it that way? But there are also some problems that they're not. And our quantum supremacy paper showed an example of that. And when you get into those problems, the energy that a classical computer would have to try to use is exponential. And we're showing that with our computer, you're not only able to solve the problem that you were never able to solve it before, but you're able to solve it for much lower energy than you are. So that if they work together, that you eventually be able to solve problems, but also be able to save energy.
Say something about the energy question. One of the reasons that AI, cryptocurrency, et cetera, has this massive energy budget, is it work and people interested in it, it's because traditional computing for those applications is inefficient. You're having to use massive amounts of flops, i.e., which are powered by fossil fuels or whatnot, to do those calculations. Remember what Dimitri showed with the iron atom? He showed how you go from 1 electron to 2 all the way up to 26. The amount of information you need to model the iron atom blows up to 67 million parameters. Oh, you can flip that around. That means that iron atom, in principle, if you had access to every electron in the iron atom as a little computer, you can make them interact, and they would. You'd have 67 million qubits, a much larger state of information in one atom. So one of the key things about quantum computers, as they come online, the annealing computers, which are simulating things and doing kind of, you're not programming it in, you're setting it up so it evolves towards your solution, and also the gate-based computers. For certain applications, they're going to be tremendously more efficient than conventional computers. Who's our critics? Well, some of the critics get back to what I said before about time scale and what the impact will be. Imagine the impact isn't as large and it takes longer than we're saying here. Then you could be a critic and say, if something real happened, it just wasn't worth it. Or it only gave me a 5% return rather than a 5 bazillion% return or something like that. Right? So some of the critics are whether we're getting the enthusiasm calibrated, right? Not that, I don't think there are too many critics saying it's a bad thing and quantum's a bad thing in principle, except even about breaking encryption. The Chinese or others are going to do it if it's doable eventually. So sitting back and doing nothing would be, malpractice, right? So I don't think there are people against it so much in principle. It's people maybe saying whether the returns are worth it from a business point of view. And there's a small number, dwindling now, of physicists. You know some of them. And it was perhaps a majority back in the 90s and about 50% when you asked your advisor, who wondered whether it would ever be possible to get to fault tolerance. We now know that fault tolerance, at least getting to error correction working, recently, as you were describing, it's happened, right? So getting to fault tolerance is just a scaling up.
So can I just add a little bit more flavor? I love that you mentioned the quantum supremacy paper. So that paper, IBM came back in response to that, remember, and said, oh, but wait, you misquoted us. It's not going to take, years on our supercomputers to replicate your results. We can do it in 2 weeks. But they could do it in 2 weeks. They were able to kind of spoof the results in 2 weeks, but the computer they needed was the size of 2 basketball courts. So think of the energy density that it took to spoof something that their quantum computer with a few qubits could do in a few seconds. It's frightening. So actually you flip it around and it's hugely positive if we can get this to work.
Yeah, it's a little bit like in the early days of flight, somebody poo-pooing the Wright brothers. Oh, they only got off the ground for a little while. My balloon can get there if I want to float downstream. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Does it suggest there would be opposition from classical computing entrenched institutions?
Look at how Jensen Huang's story has evolved in 6 months.
And again, I think that the question was, are people in the classical world, sort of looking down at quantum? I think that if they're really smart and they see what's coming, they're going to say, let's work together. So when you look at drug discovery, for instance, it has to have all of these 3 components working in concert together. So high performance computers are classical, AI, and quantum. And IBM, to kind of mention them, they said, look, on one of our fastest computers, it might take 1 million years to process an algorithm, a specific one for drug discovery. On a quantum system, it might take 13, 14 years to solve that same equation. But then when you add quantum and hybrid, quantum and high performance computing together and AI, they're now looking at like 10 hours. So from an energy perspective, the energy obviously is magnitude smaller than running a computer for 1 million years if we're still around. And I think that when we're looking at quantum as well, there's a couple companies, there's one in particular in the UK, that they're kind of like, look, we don't have to be the end-all be-all quantum computer, but if I'm able to go and work with classical systems today, so data centers, if I'm a CFO and I just spent $500 million on a data center, and I have the most state-of-the-art system today, right now, well, chances are in a year from now, it's not going to be so state-of-the-art anymore, right? Those GPUs are going to be replaced by the next gen, and your CTO is going to come to you saying, hey, it's awesome that we spent $500 million last year. let's do it again this year because we want to be one up from where we were then. And that CFO is going to just say, absolutely not. Like, we need to spend this, we need to see this out over 5 years. So let's continue to kind of use this. Well, if you add a quantum system to, let's say, every rack from this one particular company, it might level you up back to an area where, you know what, you are on par with this year's generation of GPUs. So again, it's a lot of people that understand what's happening. We aren't going to go and add 2 + 2 on a quantum system. It's just inefficient at that point. I'm not going to go stream Netflix or go look at things online on a quantum system. It's just not reasonable to think that. But for really complex things and just real messy amounts of information, that's when I'm going to start leveraging in quantum. So one more question, and then I'm sure Roger wants to get to his tequila. Yes.
So in the hardware area, is there like a race going on between different companies?
We've got two sitting side by side, but I will say yes. So the question is in the hardware area, is there a race? Yes. But I think that what's so great about it is competition is really useful. And even as a VC, I wish there were more VCs doing what we're doing, candidly, because I think that more people need to be investing in being aware of quantum. From a quantum hardware perspective, and again, you guys are literally the experts, but there are certain quantum systems that are good for certain things. So that's just a real highlight that they might be neck and neck winning in terms of the overall spectrum of race, but one might veer off and do one race and one might veer off and do another race, but they're still in a race here.
Remember, I was just saying Dimitri's plot that he had as a function of time, the number of qubits going up, those various companies and plots are showing that those are multiple hardware platforms. Superconducting qubits, ion traps, atoms in what's called Rydberg atom arrays of atoms. There's other platforms too, photonics, defects in solids like silicon or diamond or whatnot. But at least those three are very comparable, and that's good news. Don't we want competition? Don't we want lots of platforms? Don't we want maybe they get optimized because maybe one's a Phillips head screwdriver and one's a flathead screwdriver, metaphorically speaking?
So to answer your question, the race is really in that gate model hardware, right? And as I said earlier, we're the only ones who decided years ago to develop an annealing quantum computer. So there's no real race there because we're the only ones who have it. And I don't believe there's anybody else who's trying to build one today. So the race is in the gate model, and just like everybody else, the numbers are 5 to 10 years away from getting a system that's usable. We did just sell an annealing quantum computer at the end of last year to a supercomputing center where they plan to have both classical and our annealing computer sitting next to each other, so they can figure out the best way to make them work separately or together. So there is hardware actually being sold, but the race is truly in the gate model, not the annealing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I love the work that E-Wave does, especially around optimization. You'll have some amazing results about traffic optimization in the Port of Los Angeles during COVID. Really amazing stuff being done today that we can point to as saying, look, quantum is delivering value today. Within the gate models, there are 3 or 4 different types of modalities, and we're all kind of duking it out. I do not think it is a winner-take-all race. I think as each of the modalities continues to prove out, some will be better at different types of problems than others. I think that can lead to some confusion sometimes with policymakers in terms of not wanting to pick winners and losers, but also trying to figure out how to fund the supply chain in a way that all of us can flourish without feeling like the government has gone all in for one different type. So if I'm a VC, if I had won the lottery tomorrow, I'm going to look at the types of enabling technologies along the supply chain that each of the different modalities, and some of them we share, are going to need. So they mentioned dilution refrigerators. Our machine works at about 4 degrees Kelvin. That's about negative 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Superconducting models are about 0 Kelvin. That's like negative 480, I believe. They have to be really cold. So we need either dilution refrigerators, we need different forms of cooling and cryogenics. Some of those come from countries that are not always the friendliest. So you have to think about building a U.S. supply chain. And so if had unlimited capital, I'm investing in lasers. The amount of lasers that my company has to buy to move our ions and our trap is unbelievably expensive. Very few of them are in the U.S. And so focusing on cryogenics, lasers, and these technologies to actually build the hardware, Dimitri mentioned how important this is. Industrial policy in the 21st century is going to be shaped by who builds the workforce and the enabling technology so that the U.S. can win and glean the benefits of quantum.
Forgot space. It's cold and there's a lot of energy.
It's a great point. Let's go to space.
We've got another question.
Does a quantum computer replace data centers?
Repeat the question.
Does quantum computers replace data centers? So the answer is no. They're just another type of computer that are in the data center. Somebody said earlier, are they afraid, or is the classical computers, afraid of quantum computing? And I would say they probably are, because they're talking about it, right? If they're talking about it, that means they believe it's real and it's here today, and they're afraid of it. But they're not going to replace them. They're going to sit next to them, and they're going to, work hand in hand. Like I said, like we sold one to a supercomputing center in Germany, and they plan to install it and have it work with other HPCs that are there today. So I don't think, and you can also access ours through the cloud. So you have the customer has a choice of purchasing the classical computer and putting it in their data center, or using the ones that we have throughout the world through the cloud.
But does it reduce the need for as many data centers?
Yeah, and that's back to the energy. Yeah, so I mean, we can solve problems better, we can solve problems faster, and we can solve them with less energy. So that would then mean that they don't have to be there. Yeah.
So by what factor? Any guess?
It really depends on the problem, and it depends on the use case. As he said earlier, optimization is where we're specializing right now. So some of the other things that quantum computing will eventually be able to solve, the answer is going to be different. But from an optimization perspective, those use cases we are solving today, even within that, the answer is going to be different. It depends on the size of the problem, and it depends on the problem that we're trying to solve.
Sometimes it can be dramatic.
Yeah.
I just want to take a slightly more optimistic take on the data. I think it actually could increase the use of data centers, because we'll be able to solve more problems. And I'll tell you, like, for example, I'm using the analogy of DeepSeek. When DeepSeek came along, it's not like, oh, I'm making some profit, so I'm just going to stop because somebody can do it cheap. No, I can do more stuff. So one of the things that's emerging over the last couple of years, and it's been surprising to me, is to solve a chemical reaction, for example, it's just a piece of it is quantum. A lot of it will be done with AI, and like Microsoft Azure is putting this stuff together, where most of the chemical reaction is done classically. Because why? Because a classical computer is really good at big data problems. And a quantum computer is not good at big data problems. It's really good at really complicated problems. So it's like a yin and yang, and you put them together. So you can actually solve how much would it be worth to Eli Lilly to design a new drug? They're going to take a classical computer, a quantum computer, and they'll invest as much as it takes into that data center, because they can actually solve problems that they couldn't solve at all before. So I think there's an optimistic path here that I don't think I'm just too much of an optimist.
I agree.
If you want numbers, so we're not even using quantum hardware yet at Sandbox. We're using GPUs, we're using quantum-inspired techniques, tensor networks. So we basically are running quantum chemistry simulations on GPUs. When the quantum hardware is ready, it's fault tolerant, we're going to flip the switch and we'll be running on quantum hardware. But for now, we're running quantum-inspired techniques on GPUs. We're running these quantum chemistry simulations. That gives us the data, which we then use to train our AI models. In doing so, we're able to take a 7-year drug discovery pipeline down to a year or under a year, and $1 billion price tag to around $100 million price tag. That's now without the quantum computers. Imagine when we have the hardware where we're going to go.
And I mean, I'll stress on that too, when we start to think about either, poorer countries or low-income communities having access to personalized medicine, like we're not too far off from that. I think that there is a world that we all will live in that, you go down to the urgent care and they take your DNA somehow and they come up with a drug that's specifically for you and it's synthesized, within hours. And it's a formula that's generated just for you. And I think that is when we start to see just massive implications on what this technology has. And that's just scratching the surface of one of the areas that I think that this is going to have a huge impact on. One more question, and then I think that we can wrap it.
Can I just ask how big a factor is advances in material science? It seems like there's some technical problems we need to resolve, but also given the conditions that we need to operate in, are we at the point in our materials development that we can sustain an entire ecosystem?
So you're interested, the question is how significant or how mature are the advances in material science today to inform quantum technologies, to assist and enable them, right? If that's what you mean, rather than the other way around, because it's a two-way street. Absolute, so I would say that there have been advances in materials and there needs to be continued advances in materials on the march to fault-tolerant quantum computing, optimized annealing quantum computers, optimized sensors and networks and the whole range. In my 10, 15 years, 15-ish years that I've been in the quantum sensing field, the modern quantum sensing field, I've seen dramatic improvements in materials, the NVs and diamond that you mentioned, and dramatic improvement in understanding the materials that make up superconducting qubits and other sorts of systems that have partially enabled that, what Dimitri showed on his plot. Part of the scale up isn't just because it takes a long time to make a lot of qubits, it's making better materials or having better lasers or better technology so that you can build a larger quantum system of it, whichever type. Final point is that it goes the other way too. We're using quantum imagers and quantum information processors increasingly to determine and understand what kinds of steps need to be taken to make better materials. Either to characterize them and get rid of defects you don't want, and sometimes you want intentional defects, understand sources of noise that limit superconducting qubits and things like that, make better materials for lasers, etc. And as we just heard, not just for drug discovery, imagine what's going to happen when you get to fault-tolerant quantum computing, where the annealers get big enough to be able to do optimization, very advanced, so not just drugs, but also materials. You need low-loss material X, Y, or Z, low slip, high friction, low friction, more efficient batteries, all sorts of things. There's prospects coming through the quantum technology space.
So I think that it's not a matter of if, it's when this is all happening. And I think that I want to thank you all for coming here today. I think this is just an incredible conversation. There's a really great resource online from IBM who put together a book called The Quantum Decade. And I highly recommend it for everyone here. They wrote it in such a way that it's very approachable on the subject. So it really kind of dives into a lot of the stuff that we talked here today. You can Google it, it's just Quantum Decade. And what I love most about it is, not only is it written sort of for the everyday person, but at the end, it really gives a lot of practical applications on how quantum can be really useful in the world that we live in today. And all of the companies that are up here right now are doing just incredible breakthroughs. And there's a lot happening in this ecosystem, and it's very vibrant. There's not enough going on. So I also encourage you, now that you've been here, your phone algorithms will be, showing you things on quantum every day, which is great for us because now you're going to be, just blasted with news. But I think it's really important to continue to learn, continue to read about quantum, follow it a little bit, and talk to people about it, right? Have these open dialogues with your friends about what quantum is. So with that, again, Roger, thank you for hosting us.
We're gonna have time to talk out here.
Yeah, and we'll have more time to talk one-on-one, but thank you all for coming here today, and thank you guys.
Thanks, man.